Alright, here it goes. One day in middle school, I dropped a petri dish. Yeah, a freaking petri dish. I mean, who even has those in middle school science class? But we did. And that day, I had been in the lab for what felt like hours, trying to focus on this experiment that honestly didn't make sense to me. I didn't care much about biology, just about getting through the class without embarrassing myself. But then this happened. I wasn't expecting it. The petri dish fell about 4 feet and hit the ground. It bounced a foot or two in the air and then, it flew through the air, like it was possessed or something. It felt like everything around me froze. My brain was on overdrive, processing what was happening in real time. In that moment, it wasn't just about the petri dish anymore, it was like a damn metaphor for everything going wrong in my life. Why did I feel like the universe was telling me something? Because that's exactly how it felt. So, the dish hit the ground, and the sound was loud. It wasn't just the dish breaking, it was like a slap in the face. You know that moment when something small happens, but it feels like a damn earthquake in your world? That was it for me. I stood there, staring at the broken pieces scattered across the floor, trying to piece together what just happened. And then I looked up. That's when I saw it, the reaction. Everyone around me was laughing. I mean, they were trying to hold it in, but the giggles kept slipping out. Some kid in the back even snickered, "Nice job, genius." I remember feeling this heat rise in my chest, like my face was on fire. It wasn't just the embarrassment, though. Something deeper started to sink in. I could feel it, I was different. The weird kid. The one who didn't fit in. And this moment, this petri dish disaster, was just the confirmation. I had become the butt of the joke. But here's the kicker, none of them even noticed how I was feeling. Not really. I mean, yeah, I'm sure they were laughing because it was funny, but it was more than that for me. The whole thing made me realize I wasn't just the awkward guy anymore. I was the punchline. The thing about moments like these is they stick with you, right? They carve themselves into your brain, even if you try to push them away. The whole class was laughing, and I just stood there, frozen, like my feet had turned to cement. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, and the worst part? I didn't even know how to react. I just laughed too, kind of awkwardly, trying to brush it off like it didn't sting. But deep down, I felt this huge, uncomfortable lump in my throat. But then I started thinking about something more uncomfortable. This wasn't the first time I'd been that guy. You know, the one everyone talks about behind his back. The one they invite to things just so they can make fun of him. It's like, how the hell does one petri dish get to define who I am in this class? That's when I realized I wasn't just the weird kid in the back anymore. I was the one everyone expected to fail, to screw up. And it wasn't just about this one stupid petri dish. It was about all the little things, the way my classmates looked at me, the way they'd laugh at things I didn't even understand. It was as if they had written me off before I even had a chance to prove myself. And let me tell you, that realization hit harder than any glass breaking could. It felt like I had just stepped into a trap, and the worst part was I didn't know how to get out of it. At that point, the emotions hit me all at once: embarrassment, confusion, but most of all, rage. It was like a switch flipped in my brain. You ever have one of those moments where you just feel like you're gonna lose it? Where you're so angry, you can barely even keep it together? Yeah, that was me. It wasn't just about the petri dish anymore, it was everything that had been building up over the years. All the times I'd been overlooked, all the times I'd been laughed at, all the little digs that people thought I didn't notice, they all came rushing back in this tidal wave of frustration. And for a second, I seriously thought about just walking out of the class. Telling everyone to shove it and leave them to their jokes. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, seething, as the teacher tried to calm the class down, and I could feel the burn in my chest. They were still laughing. They didn't even see it. They didn't see how much it hurt. And honestly, I couldn't tell if it was more frustrating that they didn't care, or that I was letting it affect me so much. But in that moment, it didn't matter. My mind was spiraling. I was trapped in my own anger, and I couldn't escape it. I just wanted to yell, to tell them how much it sucked, but I didn't. I didn't have the words. So there I was, standing in the middle of the classroom, surrounded by laughter and snickers, but inside, I was just silent. It's like my brain had shut off everything except the sound of my heartbeat in my ears. Everyone else was talking, moving on to the next joke, but I felt this deep, cold silence in me. I couldn't shake it off. And here's the thing, it wasn't just the class. It wasn't just the fact that I had dropped a petri dish. It was about everything I had never said. All the stuff I'd held in every single time I'd been made to feel like I wasn't good enough or that I didn't belong. That was what hurt the most. It wasn't the dish breaking, it was realizing how invisible I felt. I remember feeling like I was the only person in the room who wasn't laughing, the only one not in on the joke. But I also didn't know how to make it stop. I didn't know how to speak up without feeling like I was just adding fuel to the fire. So, I just stood there in the silence, and it felt like the seconds dragged on for hours. It was like everyone had moved on, and I was the only one stuck in the past. And in that moment, it hit me, I wasn't just embarrassed. I wasn't just angry. I was alone. Completely, utterly alone. Just when I thought the whole situation couldn't get worse, something totally unexpected happened. One of the more popular guys in class, Brad, of all people, actually stood up. He was the type who would always make jokes at my expense, the one who'd egg on the whole class. But this time, he surprised me. He didn't laugh. He didn't even crack a smile. He looked at the broken petri dish and then at me. Then he just said, "It's no big deal, man. Everyone makes mistakes." It wasn't a joke. It wasn't a sarcastic comment. It was a genuine attempt to defuse the situation. For a second, I thought I was hearing things. I mean, Brad? The guy who had made fun of me countless times? He was actually being decent? The weird part? I didn't even know how to react to it. I wanted to say something, to thank him, but I couldn't. It felt like if I said anything, it would just make everything more awkward. But deep down, I appreciated it. He didn't have to do that. He didn't know me anything, but there he was, stepping up in a way I never would have expected. It didn't fix the situation, but it was like a lifeline in the middle of a storm. For the first time that day, I didn't feel completely invisible. And that small moment of kindness? It kinda stuck with me, in a way that I couldn't explain. After Brad spoke up, the room kind of shifted. The laughter didn't stop entirely, but it toned down. It felt like there was a subtle change in the air, like the atmosphere got lighter. And for the first time that class, I could breathe. It wasn't perfect, not by a long shot, but there was something different about how people were looking at me now. It wasn't with that usual pity or amusement. I wasn't the center of ridicule anymore. I don't know if it was because Brad had spoken up or because the class was just kind of moving on, but something had changed in me too. My anger was still there, bubbling under the surface, but I realized I had a choice. I didn't have to stay stuck in that moment. I didn't have to let a stupid accident define me. Yeah, it hurt. Yeah, it sucked. But maybe it wasn't the end of the world. I started to think about it more, that weird feeling of being seen, even if just for a second. It made me realize that I didn't need validation from the whole class. I didn't need to be the perfect student or the one everyone thought was cool. I just needed to be me. And maybe that was enough. I didn't know what I was going to do with this new realization, but I knew one thing: I couldn't let this one moment of embarrassment define who I was. After that day, things didn't magically change, but they also weren't quite the same anymore. I spent the rest of the class just kind of zoning out, replaying the events in my head. I wasn't sure what to make of it all. Brad's unexpected kindness had thrown me off. Why would he step in like that? I'd never been his friend, and yet there he was, showing a side of himself that no one, including me, had ever seen before. The thing is, it wasn't just about Brad. It was about me. I realized that I had been carrying this weight of thinking I was always the one who got the short end of the stick. I'd built this narrative that I was the screw-up, the one everyone laughed at. But honestly, I was tired of holding on to that. I started thinking about all the other times I'd been caught up in moments like this, moments where I let my embarrassment and anger control me. How many times had I let people's opinions decide how I felt about myself? How many times had I just accepted being the punchline because it was easier than fighting back? I knew I wasn't the same person I was before I dropped that petri dish. That stupid little dish had opened my eyes to something bigger, the fact that I could take control of my own story. I didn't need to let other people write my narrative. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was ready to let go of the anger. To stop letting moments like that define me. It was time to change the way I saw myself. A couple of days passed after the petri dish incident. Things at school went back to normal, or at least, it seemed that way. I still had my moments of awkwardness, my moments of feeling out of place. But now, there was a difference. I wasn't carrying the weight of that stupid dish around anymore. I made a decision. I was done with being the joke. I wasn't going to let myself be the guy who everyone laughed at. I wasn't going to be defined by a moment that was beyond my control. It didn't mean I had to become some new person overnight, but I knew I had to stop feeding into the narrative of my own failure. That day in class, I decided I was going to try something different. Next time something went wrong, I wouldn't shrink back or hide. I'd face it head on. If I made a mistake, I'd own it, but I wouldn't let it control me. I wasn't sure how exactly, but I was going to start standing up for myself. Not in a big dramatic way, more like small, everyday things. I started with the simplest of steps. The next time someone made a joke at my expense, I didn't laugh it off. I looked them in the eye and said, "Not funny." It wasn't much. But for me, it was a huge step. As the days went on, I started to notice a shift, not just in how I was handling things, but in how people were reacting to me. It wasn't like everyone suddenly treated me with respect or anything. Hell, no one was going to change overnight. But I could feel a subtle difference. When I started standing up for myself, it was like the air around me changed. People noticed. And honestly, some of them didn't like it. The same kids who had once thrown jabs at me now seemed a little uncomfortable. It wasn't that they were scared of me, it was more like they weren't sure what to do when I didn't laugh along with them anymore. And that felt good. Not in a cocky way, but in a way that made me realize I could control my space. Of course, some of the kids still took shots. It wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Brad, for example, started making more jokes, testing the waters again, like he was trying to see if I would break. But I didn't. I stayed firm. I didn't let their words have power over me anymore. It was harder than I thought, though. The more I resisted, the more I felt the pressure. It was like I was walking on a tightrope, and every misstep could send me plummeting back to the bottom. But I kept walking. One step at a time. Because, deep down, I knew it wasn't about being perfect, it was about staying true to myself, even when it was tough. The real breakthrough came during a group project. We were assigned to work together on a presentation, and guess who ended up with the same group as Brad? Yeah, me. And let me tell you, I was not looking forward to it. I had no idea what to expect. Would he make more jokes? Would he try to embarrass me in front of everyone again? But something different happened this time. Brad didn't make fun of me. In fact, he barely said anything at all during the group work. I don't know if he was being respectful, or if maybe he just didn't have the energy for it anymore. But I realized something, it wasn't my job to keep his behavior in check. I couldn't control how others acted, but I could control how I reacted to them. For the first time, I saw Brad as, well, just another guy. Not the guy who had bullied me, not the guy who made me feel small. Just a guy who was doing his part in a project. And weirdly, I didn't feel the same anger towards him. It wasn't that I had forgiven him, I wasn't ready for that, but I had moved past it. The presentation went fine. In fact, it went better than expected. I was able to contribute confidently, without the usual sense of dread that I would screw up. And Brad? He didn't try to sabotage me or make me feel bad. We just got through it, like normal classmates. That moment, that small breakthrough, taught me something big. Sometimes, change doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't come with fireworks or dramatic gestures. Sometimes, it comes quietly. And in the quiet, you start to realize that you've grown without even noticing. Looking back at that day, I couldn't help but realize how much I'd grown. Not just in terms of standing up for myself, but in how I viewed the people around me. It wasn't just Brad anymore, it was everyone. I had spent so much time worrying about how others saw me, letting their opinions dictate my worth. But now, I was starting to see them as people. They were flawed, just like me. And that shift in perspective made me realize that I didn't have to make everyone like me to feel good about myself. It wasn't easy. The old habits, the old fears, they still lingered. I still had moments where I doubted myself, where I worried that I wasn't good enough or that people were laughing at me behind my back. But the difference now was that I wasn't letting those thoughts control me. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to fit into anyone else's mold. I just had to be me, and that was enough. As I moved through the rest of middle school, things didn't magically get better. But they didn't get worse either. I wasn't the center of attention anymore, but I was also no longer the punchline. I learned to navigate through the ups and downs without letting them define me. I realized that the key wasn't changing who I was to fit in. It was about accepting myself and learning how to stand firm, even when everything around me seemed to be falling apart. It was a few weeks after the group project, and I was walking home from school, just minding my own business, when I bumped into Brad again. This time, though, it wasn't in the classroom or during a project, it was just me, him, and the street. At first, I thought he might say something sarcastic or try to make a joke. But instead, he surprised me again. He actually said, "Hey, man. You've been different lately. In a good way." I wasn't sure how to respond at first. Was this a compliment? A dig? Was he trying to be sarcastic again? But his face was serious, and his tone wasn't mocking. It was sincere? Weird, right? "Thanks," I said, a little hesitant. "I guess I'm just done with letting people walk all over me." He nodded, like he understood. There was a brief silence, and then, for the first time ever, Brad did something I never thought I'd see. He actually apologized. Not for everything, not for all the jokes, but he said, "Look, I know I made fun of you a lot. And I guess I was just being an idiot. Sorry for that." I stood there, trying to process what was happening. Apology? From Brad? It was unexpected. It was human. It didn't fix everything, but it was something. We talked for a few more minutes. Nothing profound or life-changing, but there was this sense that the past was behind us. No, we weren't going to be best friends, but there was this unspoken understanding that things had changed. And for me, that was enough. As I walked away from that conversation with Brad, I had this strange sense of relief. It wasn't because I'd gotten an apology from him. Honestly, I didn't even need it. It was more about the realization that I had finally started to let go of all the resentment I'd been holding onto for so long. For years, I had let that anger control me. I'd built this whole identity around being the victim, the one who never fit in. But in that moment, I realized how much power I had been giving to other people. I didn't need anyone else's approval to feel good about myself. I didn't need to be the one they pitied, the one they laughed at. I was more than that. Brad's apology wasn't the end of the story, it wasn't some magic fix. But it was a step. A sign that I had done the right thing by standing up for myself. It wasn't just about him or about the class. It was about me taking control of my own narrative. I wasn't the broken kid anymore. I wasn't the punchline of every joke. I was me, and that was enough. The real lesson here was one I hadn't expected. Sometimes, the person you need to forgive the most is yourself. I'd spent so much time holding onto anger and fear, thinking I couldn't move past it. But now, I saw that the only way forward was to let go. To forgive myself for the mistakes I had made, the times I had let others define who I was. And as I walked home that day, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I wasn't who I used to be. And that felt like freedom. Looking back on everything, I realized that dropping that petri dish wasn't just a funny accident. It was a turning point. It was the moment that set everything in motion. It forced me to confront my own fears, my insecurities, and the way I'd let other people's opinions shape who I thought I was. I used to think that being the butt of the joke, being the one everyone laughed at, was something I had to just accept. That it was my fate. But I've learned that we don't have to be defined by our mistakes, our failures, or by the people who try to put us down. We can change the narrative. We can choose to stand up for ourselves, even when it's hard. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt like giving up, when I thought it was easier to just keep my head down and let life happen to me. But every time I stood up for myself, even in the smallest ways, I gained a little more confidence. And that's the thing, they were small steps, but they added up. Each one was a reminder that I wasn't as powerless as I had believed. So here's what I've learned: don't let the world decide who you are. Don't let other people's words and actions define your worth. It's up to you to set your own boundaries and to stand up for what you deserve, even if it feels uncomfortable. You're allowed to make mistakes, and you're allowed to fail. But you're also allowed to grow from them, to learn from them, and to not let them hold you back. If I could go back and change that day, I wouldn't. Because it was the moment that pushed me to finally see my own strength. And that, I think, is something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.